What's up, freaks and lunatics? We're back with another educational episode, hopefully. And well, if you do not think that you're a freak, I want with this episode to try and prove that you are. And I'm taking you at the level of the human. Just what we brush over and overlook all of the time is that, I said in my last video, we are just very visionary creatures with a very rich experience. At least it seems, compared with the rest of the animal kingdom. We seem to be the only ones that have language or religion or art, or now this whole technism movement in science. And I think it is a bit concerning to see that we are sort of tending more to science and industry at the expense of arts, religion, and culture, and we still have those aspects to us, and I dare posit that there might be some kind of needs, both aesthetic and religious, i.e. visionary type needs, because this is just so intrinsic to who we are, and I think it is almost self-evident that the vision you have of life will affect your particular manner of behaving and moving in the world. It's whatever you're doing to stimulate yourself with a greater or lesser vision, with prospect and ideas of life avails me of these opportunities. Am I going to take them? Am I going to be an active participant in this very unlikely existence I found myself in? Or am I just going to be at odds with it all of the time, in opposition to it, neglectful of my very existence, refusing to acknowledge the simple fact of my existence? Or because it's a curious thing, and this is why I'm interested in religion and Huxley for the same reason, though there are many others, because men today, if they will, can say religion is the stupidity of our forebears, and it's just dated thought. It no longer has any truth anymore. It's really, I think, only a problem of openness to these people, is that they no longer open themselves up to the idea of possibly having a religious experience or a religious view of life. And I like William James' definition of religion, what religion is for individual man. It is the total outlook or attitude he has in the face of his existence in its entirety. And this really makes everybody equal under this bare fact that we have to have a view and an attitude toward life. Hence, we're all, in James's definition, religious. So I have some readings picked out for us. I have been reading some of Schopenhauer, some of Aldous Huxley, and I think that the readings I have selected present very well a particular contrast in worldview. You can either, in so many words, look at life the one way or the other, and there's not really a whole lot of choice. It's, if you don't have the active and, I might even say, mystical view of life, where you are ambitious. William Blake has this quote, "Life delights in life." And, well, anybody who has ever beheld a marvel or heard a great piece of music or seen something moving in nature, in writing, or with a spouse. It could really be anything, but when something suggests to you in your firsthand experience, life, aliveness, reality, and it just amps your sense of reality up to a height, and it's wow, I didn't know this could happen. This is astonishing in the highest degree, and the whole character of your experience changes. And we have tended to call these mystical or religious experiences, and let's just say they fit the characterization of entering into an extraordinary condition, literally in the etymological sense, extraordinary. If we just take the average of what life seems typically to be like, which Schopenhauer is really going to acquaint us with, it's just things are not quite good enough. When I get my joy, it flees away from me. I'm only really conscious of my pain, and it just gets worse, and it maintains itself. And when I get the joy, it's somewhat satisfying, but it flees, and it just teases me. But we'll see later with Huxley an example of somebody who, in himself, he creates a solution similar to what Colin Wilson in The Outsider posits that people could do. Is he begins with quote-unquote nihilists in that book, and then toward the end he winds up at visionaries. And one of the great insights of psychology and existentialism is that we are visionaries, and there's ways of corresponding our vision or imagination with facts, or in ways that are effective in a hermeneutic sort of way. And these are often because we can't have access to the facts, and I'm talking about the second hermeneutic ones, and also because there are realities of inner experience which require us to make leaps and say, give it some special word and confer it some mystical significance, because the private realm of experience is so singular, and no other human being has an experience like we ourselves as individuals do. And so I'm going to get to Schopenhauer now, but I think that it is a sort of obligation for all of us in ourselves to come to terms with our situation, what sorts of strengths and weaknesses we have inherited, the total character of ourselves as individual human beings. And if you're like myself, then you found it very hard to fit in with people, and that it's been rough, but at the same time, I feel that solitude has given me a chance to read into great authors, to go into nature and to enter reflective states, and to learn about religion, and in particular the transformations which are possible if you can just, as it were, grow up and realize that nobody is necessarily above religion, simply by the fact that we're all capable of having religious experiences. And so we see God in this country and that country, all over the world, you have to wonder, is there not some interior reason that is causing all of these people all over the place to use the term God? And when I read Huxley, the sorts of experiences which he describes very well will make plain why we have used that word and similar words to describe states of consciousness which are above the ordinary and can actually make the ordinary bearable. And I see that the problem, it was certainly a problem for myself, is that the ordinary is unbearable until you find ways to navigate and perceive and move through it. And the great thing about this is that you can make life more extraordinary for other people if you can find a way to move freely and effectively in a way that fits your character and where you are carrying out functions or contributions which you and nobody else can do. You can serve as a sort of inspiration, because my philosophy professor said in learning about religion, you learn what you are. And I don't know exactly what that means, and yet it rings as so true to me, because, for instance, when I read Lao Tzu's Tao Te Ching, I don't know what's going on there, what exists in that book, but if you just are open enough to the experience, that's the thing, is that there's no particular message. There's an experience that's hiding in these words, and it's just waiting to see when you will open yourself up, break your shell, and just say, just enter a receptive state. And that's the thing. And this is also why the word God, I swear I'm going to start reading, but this is also why God is actually a very, very important word, is because it conveys the sense of other, a great other. And, well, transformations, that sort of thing, come about in people when they have that experience and pay heed to it and really take in what it's offering to them. That's when they really change and develop this sort of faith or confidence, which Jung has called the religious function. And I think that's really almost an onus for all of us to learn ourselves so that we can gain that confidence and thus be effective and leave good impressions on other people. And so in Colin Wilson's book, Mysticism was a kind of answer to nihilism. And I forget where I read it, but someone said that Nietzsche, with his works, was positing that a mysticism would be necessary for individuals to surpass the limitations of language, which, gosh, I don't know how I'm going to fit this all into my video, but this is huge, and this is something that Eastern religions, that I really, really like about them, is that they, for instance, Zen koans, they are these incomprehensible propositions or questions, and you try to make sense of it. And if once you realize that it's impossible to make sense of it, you just, there's some change that comes about in you, and this is a very mysterious and cool thing, but it's a definite thing that occurs, and sometimes the koan ends, and by this, so-and-so was enlightened. Just, if somebody got slapped on the head with a flip-flop or something, it was just, that was it for him. Somebody just had to do something crazy and senseless enough, and so counter to his expectations or plans, to leave him perplexed and bamboozled, just to get a direct experience of reality where he realizes the fallibility of language and logic, and that, experience has purely its own logic, which is just like dreams, impossible to understand and accept in itself. And I think that this is what, if there is such a thing, a religious function consists of. It's this learning again, raw, immediate experience without passing judgments on it, but just simply being with what is, or suchness, as Huxley calls it. So, I may skip Schopenhauer this time because there is so much from Huxley I would like to read, unfortunately, but just know, in summa, for those who don't necessarily read Schopenhauer, that he sees existence, human existence, as something to be sorry for. We should never be grateful for it, because the joy of 1,000 people cannot get rid of the death, agony, and misery of a single individual. I just picked haphazardly a couple of quotes that I was going to read from him. But let's get to Huxley now, because I have several pages to read, and in just beautiful English, he says what I think we can profit of by reading Eastern esotericism or spirituality, such as the Tao and Zen. And yeah, so I'm going to read this, but be mindful all the while of this experience of a dislodging of the egoic identity, where the person sees something like a divine will or an autonomous will in other. It is the movement of an other. It is not his willing. It is something else. And he recognizes this everywhere and realizes that it's inside him, and that he's tapping into something, maybe or maybe not, divine. So let's go. And now he's commenting on a poem that he had read before. I won't go into explaining it, but the moral of the story is that Sokaian's words, his answer fell into a pattern, a mold. He was caught by his own concept. And having been caught, he was no longer free to become one with the freely blowing wind of suchness. And just note this language, too. It's the raw, basic fact of experience, suchness. Just the most general word you could use. Any verbal formula, even a formula which correctly expresses the facts, can become, for the mind that takes it too seriously and idolatrously worships it as though it were the reality symbolized by the words, an obstacle in the way of immediate experience. To a Zen Buddhist, the idea that a man can be saved by giving assent to the propositions contained in a creed would seem the wildest, the most unrealistic, and dangerous of fancies. Hardly less fantastic, in his eyes, would seem the idea that high feelings can lead to enlightenment, that emotional experiences, however strong and vivid, are the same as, or even remotely analogous to, the experience of suchness. Zen, says the Sokaian, is a religion of tranquility. It is not a religion which arouses emotion, causing tears to well from our eyes, or stirring us to shout aloud the name of God. When the soul and the mind meet in a perpendicular line, so to speak, in that moment, complete unity between the universe and the self will be realized. Strong emotions, however lofty, tend to emphasize and strengthen the fatal illusion of the ego, which it is the whole aim and purpose of religion to transcend. So maybe this is what Nietzsche meant about needing something like an individual mysticism in order for the one, solitary man to overcome the limitations of language because here's the thing, is that they limit your experience so much if you are, as Huxley said, idolatrous to any creed or set of words. And so Nietzsche, in my last video, I was saying how he said that we need the assumption of the existence of a fixed, constant ego in order to use our reason, in order to speak coherently in the logical way that we do. And so convincing, especially in English, is this word I, that we take I, this conceptual, practical thing, to be our total self, and thus we're very confused about what we are, but we think I, that's who I am. But then you have an encounter in some extraordinary experience with not I, and all I can say is that it's very revealing. I won't go detailing the experience so much because it's just something I think people have to come to on their own, but Huxley says the whole aim of religion is to transcend the ego, and to do that you must find God, so to speak, and recognize that he's been working through you and everything all along, and that your experience is what he has been willing it, and you've been thinking it's wrong or that you're in the wrong, but there's just so many things about our lives and experience that, were it not for these autonomous natural processes working on in us and around us, all beneath our consciousness, then the whole cosmic world order would just, it wouldn't be. It relies on whatever this strange non-egoic force is, and we are so equally a part to that as everything else. Buddha taught that there is no ego either in man or in Dharma. The term Dharma in this case denotes nature, and all the manifestations of nature. There is no ego in anything. There you go. Thus, what is known as the two kinds of non-ego means that there is no ego in man and no ego in things. From metaphysics, Sokayan passes to ethics. According to his faith of non-ego, he asks, how can we act in daily life? This is one of the great questions. The flower has no ego. In spring it blooms. In autumn it dies. The stream has no ego within it. The wind blows and waves appear. The riverbed drops abruptly and there is a waterfall. We ourselves must really feel these things within ourselves. We must realize by our own experience how this non-ego functions within us. There you go again. It functions without any hindrance, without any artificiality. This cosmic non-ego is the same as what the Chinese call Tao, or what the Christians call the indwelling spirit, with which we must collaborate and by which we must permit ourselves moment by moment to be inspired, making ourselves docile to suchness, capital S, in an unremitting act of self-abandonment to the order of things, to everything that happens except sin, which is simply the manifestation of egoity, and must therefore be resisted and rejected. Tao, or non-ego, the divine immanence, manifests itself on every level from the material to the spiritual. Deprived of that physiological intelligence which governs the vegetative functions of the body and through whose agency the conscious will is translated into action, lacking the aid of what may be termed animal grace, we could not live at all. And animal grace is something like a pre-self-conscious movingness, such as animals exhibit. They don't really think about themselves moving, they just, or have conscious of themselves doing so, except, this is a controversial question because, of course, we can't know how much or little animals have consciousness, but they seem to lack at least as intense a degree of self-awareness as we have. Moreover, it is a matter of experience that the more the ego's superficial consciousness interferes with the workings of the animal grace, the sicker we become and the worse we perform all acts requiring a high degree of psychophysical coordination. The emotions connected with craving and aversion impair the normal functioning of the organs and lead, in the long run, to disease. Similar emotions in the strain which arises from the desire for success prevent us from achieving the highest proficiency not only in such complex activities as dancing, making music, playing games, doing any kind of highly skilled work, but also in such natural psychophysical activities as seeing and hearing. He's saying that identifying too idolatrously, too devotedly to identity with the ego really messes you up bodily and psychologically. It's because it's a misunderstanding of the self, which is something like a vital principle or Tao or God. That's the religious transformation sort of thing that I was talking about before. It's you learn that. Empirically, it has been found that malfunctioning of the organs can be corrected and proficiency in acts of skill increased by the inhibition of strain and negative emotions. If the conscious mind can be trained to inhibit its own self-regarding activities, if it can be persuaded to let go and give up its straining for success, the cosmic non-ego, the Tao that is immanent in all of us, can be relied upon to do what has to be done with something like infallibility. It's amazing. Just let the force of nature work through you, sort of thing. Trust. On the level of politics and economics, the most satisfactory organizations are those which are achieved through planning for unplanning. Analogously, on the psychophysical levels, health and maximum proficiency are achieved by using the conscious mind to plan its collaboration and its subordination to that immanent order of things, which is beyond the scope of our personal planning, and with whose workings our busy little ego can only interfere. We can plan all we want, but experience is going to prove contrary, let's just say, or different than what we expected, basically all of the time. Animal grace precedes self-consciousness, and is something which man shares with all other living beings. Spiritual grace lies beyond self-consciousness, and only rational beings are capable of cooperating with it. Self-consciousness is the indispensable means to enlightenment. At the same time, it is the greatest obstacle in the way, not only of the spiritual grace which brings enlightenment, but also of the animal grace, without which our bodies cannot function efficiently or even retain their life. So, at some point in life, we get self-consciousness, and this is our starting point, but then some mystic function or change can be brought about by means of self-consciousness, and you can discover it. I won't even go into describing what it is, because I don't know, but it is an experience. The order of things is such that no one has ever got anything for nothing. All progress has to be paid for. Precisely because he has advanced beyond the animal level to the point where, through self-consciousness, he can achieve enlightenment, man is also capable, through that same self-consciousness, of achieving physical degeneration and spiritual perdition. So, at the end there, he's basically saying self-consciousness will either be your pathology or your salvation. It's, are you going to go this way or that way? And I think it's unfortunate that people have become skeptical of, say, Christianity, but then also, as Jung and Nietzsche and William Blake and others have pointed out, that there are cracks and holes in the Christian theology as it has been taught, and it doesn't, how it is set up is not conducive to what Jung calls the conjunctio oppositorum. Just think of the yin-yang symbol of the Tao that basically everybody knows, is that there is conscious existence for man, and then there is unconscious existence. And usually when you have people who are suffering neurosis or even physical disease, they are at odds or even at war with their unconscious side. And to mention Jung again, he has a great quote: the face you look with which you look into the unconscious, it looks back at you. And to translate that, it's something like the way you relate to your immediate direct experience, it's going to look the same way back at you. So if you have an impoverished view of your experience, if it's very constricted and you haven't learned how to relate to the contents of your experience well, and the strange thing about it is that, to mention why the word God is important, though people are trying to get rid of it, is that there is, whatever anybody has to say, the experience of a voice or an other in one or in the vicinity of oneself in solitude. And I think it's something that we all know. And it's something like conscience, but it's even deeper than that too. It's like the life force itself. And there's something, to be a solitary individual is, whatever you do with your life, also to have this conversation with your unconscious side and how it affects your experience. And so we could equate Jung's unconscious with God or the Tao, and it is all of those things that are sustaining your organism and giving you strength and maintaining your experience and your consciousness that you aren't aware of. And there's all sorts of fantasy material from which emanate from this unconscious thing or realm, and people assuredly have had experiences of something that they thought fitting to call God. And I myself have had experiences like that, but people have a problem with this because modern men in particular are tired of being subject to the church and the other outside, just anybody who says you have to believe this way, and if you believe in God, it's this God, and he has these attributes, he has these specific rules in contradistinction to the religions over there. This is what people are tired of, and the benefit of reading someone like Jung or Huxley is that they show how perfectly natural it is for the individual to go looking for a God experience or a mystical experience to, for the first time, with the most reality, confront life and experience a revelation sort of thing. And I think this really happens to people if they have the right approach to their experience and realize that we begin with self-consciousness, and this can be a very damning condition, because I wanted to read Schopenhauer, but he just shows the temporality and fleetingness of all of our pleasures and just how endurant our feelings of inadequacy are. And I think this is really almost at the heart of why something like a religious function might be necessary, is that people can have feelings of life's inadequacy that run so deep that either their thoughts start to drive them crazy or they begin to become violent, they go mad. This is real stuff, and I think that we have to be very honest with ourselves about it. We harbor wilderness in us, and if you aren't careful of yourself and you don't take note of when maybe things are out of order and you might be losing it a little bit, and this is just something that we have to seriously keep in mind, that we're all subject to fall and to undergo terrible changes or developments in the life around us and in us. And so, I don't know what the answer to this is, but I think it's you either choose to live or you choose to die. And there is a wide gap between the effects of both of those choices, and you can even sustain a life of living death where you are living in just a vain way, and perhaps being snappy to other people and barking at them for trivial reasons and just being nasty. Or it could even just be a sort of Brave New World distractive loss of consciousness where there's just the drugs and the televisions and everything that have always got you, and so you're not really alive anymore. You aren't alive in the sense that Huxley's John Savage was in that book, and he was very into Shakespeare and religion, just like Huxley. So I think Huxley actually identified with John Savage quite a bit, and John Savage was he was primitive man, basically, in that book. As Jung talks about primitive man, he is acquainted with God, with the mystic aspect of his experience. He participates in that natural visionariness and incommunicable delight that just spontaneously falls on people who are receptive to that. And I think that especially today, it takes making oneself receptive to it and restoring something like what Jung has called an original condition, where, like primitive man, you are on relatively solid ground and sure about yourself and existence, your place in it, everything, so on and so forth. You have experienced or incorporated some kind in some kind of confirmation. And I think it's definitely possible for people to have these experiences of confirmation from something as simple as just reading something profound in a book, or an insight dawns on you because you were idle or on a walk. And this is something I notice in my daily life quite a bit. And if I didn't have those moments, then I would probably quite think like Schopenhauer. But I think that he rejected religiosity and the visionary. Well, not necessarily. He didn't reject the visionary side of man. I consider him one, definitely. It's some of his explanations and examples in his books for the points he makes are very vivid and true to life, and they're living. So he has that sense for that life principle, and that it's possible for men to experience. But then there is, as it were, a divine intensity that can take on that I don't think he allowed himself to experience. He became too modern, and I think enjoyed the pessimistic worldview. But for some, that's just, because I don't know how Schopenhauer related to people, but I would think that anybody who is without any formidable worldview that works and gets him through life, I don't think that they are typically very kind or helpful to people, but rather people who have a vision for themselves, know what they are, where they are in their life, what sort of experiences are possible for man, and that it's possible to lead a whole life without seeing what truly matters or refusing to see what truly matters. But then there is the opposite, and I think this is what Jung and Huxley, Nietzsche, William Blake, William James as well, all of them were trying to teach this, that, maybe the religions or ways of religious thinking that we have been exposed to in our particular stations in life has not been, let's say, desirable, that were there to be a more enthusiastic and lively, I guess, religion, celebratory, then that would be more desirable. And I think that's what's missing from Western religions. Huxley used the word solemnity, seriousness, also sublimity, and supernatural. It's, on the one hand, the seriousness, which is a hindrance to celebration, and also the supernatural can cause us to doubt the earth and nature, and thus we don't celebrate. But I think that there is a way of living naturally as a natural being, but also with a cognizance that we have some strange capacities and are liable to have some outstanding sorts of insights and perceptions, and that if the doors of perception were cleansed, things would appear as they are, infinite. William Blake quote, which gave Huxley the name for his book, The Doors of Perception, and also the name of the band, The Doors, they got from Huxley, who got it from William Blake. It's just some people who happen to see that there are an infinite number of ways of looking at anything, even just the total view of your own life. And I think that this is something, consciously or unconsciously, we decide for ourselves is, how am I gonna play this game? I mean, how am I gonna go into the future? I mean, there's all these different ways I could do it. Granted, there are some things that are just off limits that I could never do. I don't have the means. But there's quite a lot within my means, and there's a way of gauging what would be more ideal versus what would be kind of a letdown and not something that I would be proud to look back on. And people who open themselves up to these strange experiential states seem to have a lasting and rich contentment with life, and thus are able to participate in it quite well. So I think I'm going to end it there. I'm sorry I couldn't get to Schopenhauer, but very, very cool book. And I think that this Eastern insight of the non-egoic will, which functions all over the place, everywhere in us, no less than anywhere else, that if people could awake to this insight and awake to the simple fact that we think and have insights, intuitions inside, is pretty amazing. And it's just something that we overlook, and we think that it's the most normal thing ever. But once you awake to that simple fact, that I said it in my Huxley video about a year ago that I posted on here, that it's as if God had been under our noses the whole time and we simply didn't see him. And there's really this strange ontological shift in being that goes on in one when you just simply acknowledge the mere presence of a mind and its autonomy, and that it's always going on according to this nature principle. And if you can recognize that, you can see that you can start to work with it rather than against it, because when you are tricked by your thoughts into thinking that you are I, then the thoughts usually are the slave owner of you, and you're in their grips. But if you realize that you're something more than I, you're integral to life itself, and whatever it is that produced life and keeps it going is in you too. And just this simple acknowledgement, and that force has given us a very rich experience that can go in so many ways, and that can even be directed to certain more conducive states of mind and prospects. Then I think that just knowing this, it gives you the ability to keep yourself from regressing into chaos and losing your way, becoming bitter and a nobody, but rather you are an active participant in life who indeed has something almost like a lasting joy, which survives even the worst times of your life. It's because you see through it. It's you found out what's real or something like that. And so everything painful and doubtful doesn't really get to you anymore. And I think this is the value in learning about religions, is that it affords you almost some kind of invincibility, and you develop a healthy indifference toward the contents of your experience, so that you don't get lost in the tumult and lose your way, but rather you can just observe the changes, say that it doesn't matter what your judgment about it is or your plans about the future were. It is what it is. The situation isn't wrong. It's the way I am dealing with it and have chosen to situate myself in it and perhaps doing so unwittingly and without skill, but you can sharpen that skill and really learn how better to observe and also participate and experience. I think this is the dialogue of man's life. He's got to watch, but he's also got to play. And so, conjunctio oppositorum, we have to resolve all of these paradoxes about our conscious experience and realize that we're not all consciousness, and that not everything is on the ego consciousness, but there's always the unknown forces, the transpersonal, the cosmic, that are always working and keeping everything going without our having to try to do anything. I always mention how we get up every day and do what it is that we do in our daily lives as though it were the most normal thing. Well, who is it that decides to do that? It seems to just happen, and whatever those forces are, they're working through us and everywhere. And I think that it's just so helpful for people to discover their intrinsicality with this cosmic order, and we're all in this kind of symphony, and if you can awaken to that, it can really sound like a symphony and not like chaos and death and horror, but you actually find something miraculous about this existence that we've gotten, which could have been nothing, but it's something. And so there's this lyric, rather feel pain than nothing at all, 3 Days Grace song, I think. It's, well, yeah, at least there's something. And so I think I'll end it there. Went way over the amount of time I wanted to do, but that's okay. Those who like mystic type stuff like myself and who sat through this, I thank you. And I just wonder about the fact that people deprive themselves of these experiences, and I don't know, for me they have just been so important, and I'm glad to have known them, and I think there's a way of learning how better to experience purely and to just take what is for what it is, and to ride the changes quite smoothly and confidently, because you've just realized the autonomy of life and how great it is, and it works perfectly on its own through us and everywhere, as I've said 5 times now. So thanks, guys.